If you could please type your name and county into the chat, that would be so wonderful so that we can make sure that you all are marked present for our attendance. And while we wait for others to join, this gives us a great opportunity to get our stretches and breathing exercises out or whatever it may be that can help us be most present and prepared this morning. And welcome everybody who's just joining us. It's wonderful to see you all here this morning. And if you haven't had the chance to do so yet, please type your name and county into the chat. Thank you, thank you. It's very helpful for attendance purposes. And we should be starting in just a few moments, so please get comfortable in a setting where you can actively participate and utilize your materials for this training. And thank you again for joining us. Let's go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone to APS Funding and Realignment. What does that mean to you? My name is Sierra Santos. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Training Operations Assistant for Adult Protective Services Workforce Innovations, also known as APSWI or APSWE. And I'll be moderating this workshop alongside our wonderful speakers for today. So we've sent you all the participant manual to utilize during this training, but in case you don't have it on hand, I'm going to post it now in the chat. It's downloadable and you can edit it as you'd like. All right, that went ahead and posted. So, all right, to start things off, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Academy and APSWI. The Academy for Professional Excellence is a project of San Diego State School of Social Work. Its mission is to provide exceptional workforce development and learning experiences for the transformation of individuals, organizations, and communities. APSWI is a program of the Academy that provides innovative workforce development to APS professionals and their partners. And from all of us at APSWE, we just want to say that we're so grateful that you're here today as you play such a vital part in the Academy's mission to revolutionize the way people work to ensure that the world is a healthier place. And before we dive into the workshop, I'd like to take a moment with you all to share something of purpose and great value that inspires the Academy's core values and what we represent. I'm going to share with you all a land acknowledgement. The purpose of a land acknowledgement is to recognize the relationship of Indigenous peoples to the land. I'm coming here from Kumeyaay land and bordering Luiseño, and I'm going to post a link in the chat if you'd like to see which native land that you are on. So this acknowledgement of the land is multifaceted in its meaning. It shows respect to the people of the land, to the land itself, and to their relationship to one another. They are statements that recognize the dispossession from the land, the harm brought by colonial practices, beliefs, and policies. They validate and recognize the continued presence of Indigenous peoples everywhere. And lastly, when offered in earnest and with sincerity, they're the first steps in reconciliation and healing. For millennia, over 100 tribal nations have been a part of this land. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. As members of the Academy community, we acknowledge this legacy. We promote this balance and harmony. We find inspiration from this land, the land of the original inhabitants of California. While developing a land acknowledgement statement is an important step towards reconciliation and healing, the statement alone is not enough. It's important to also identify concrete steps and actions that can be taken. These actions can involve putting in time and effort to research and learn more about the indigenous communities of the lands you are on, returning artifacts to their appropriate tribal communities, working to protect and preserve the land, and much more. You can use the same link I posted in our chat. That'll take you to our website, which lists many ways that you can take action. And thank you for participating in this moment of recognition with me. So I'm sure many of you might be familiar with navigating through Zoom at this point, but I'm going to briefly review how we'll be using these various functions for today's workshop. For audio, you could click the microphone icon for more settings and options. To unmute while speaking, you can press and hold the space bar. And just a reminder during our time as we're practicing mindfulness today, when you're listening or others are speaking, please mute yourself and of course unmute if you're about to speak. For video camera, click the video icon titled Stop Video to share and unshare your camera. If you'd like to update your name being displayed or to add your pronouns, go ahead and click Participants, hover over your name, select More, and then select Rename. For the chat box, this is where you can share questions and answers and such during the appropriate times. This is also where you can send me a private message if needed. To do, just click the drop down button that says to everyone and then just change it to Sierra Santos. Uh, reactions, this is where we can express ourselves with a hand raise or clap hand or whatever you resonate with. This is also where you can raise your hand if you have a question during the appropriate time. And just a couple of important things to note about this training. We'll be doing a short live feedback at the end of the day to gather your opinions on the workshop, so please keep that in mind as you're experiencing today's session. And lastly, I'm sure we all know that technical glitches are inevitable. So in the event that something of that nature occurs during this session, we thank you in advance for your patience and understanding. Well, thank you all for listening. I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Dawn now.
Thanks so much, Sierra. Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to have you here with us for this Leaders Institute workshop. We're expecting a large number of people, so this seems to be a topic that really resonates. So we're glad to be here in this space with you today. I'm Dawn Gibbons-McWayne. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the program director for the Adult Protective Services Workforce Innovations Program, otherwise known as AppSuite. And I am coming to you from the land of the Piam Cowicham Luiseno people. And I want to briefly turn it over to Megan, our Leaders Institute coordinator, for introduction.
Hi, I'm Megan. I'm the Leaders Institute coordinator, and I'm coming to you from Sacramento. And I am just supporting and tracking. I'll be tracking your questions in the chat. And otherwise, I'm looking forward to this workshop as much as you all are. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Other members of our AppSuite team, you met Sierra, and then we also have Emily, Callie, and Jennifer. So we've got a good showing from our AppSuite team all here to support a really great training this morning. So I mentioned this is a Leaders Institute workshop. Why are we here today? Of course, we're here today talking about APS funding and realignment. But just in terms of the Leaders Institute project, one of the goals or the purposes of the Leaders Institute is to support APS and adult services leaders and to help support you in making connections statewide with your colleagues. No one understands better the very challenging work that you do like your colleagues do. We will be sending out a contact list following the workshop so that you can reach out. So any of you that anyone that opted out, of course, your information will not be shared. But for the rest of folks, we'll be sending that out so that you can continue those connections. Another one of the goals of the Leaders Institute project is helping to raise the visibility of APS programs, helping you to advance your APS programs, and collectively helping to advance APS programs statewide. We're here today again to support you by providing this information and discussion about APS funding and realignment. It's a very complex topic. Ardee is going to mention later, but was sharing with us, there's an entire 2-day workshop all about realignment. So, but we're going to be just providing a broad overview on that this morning. In terms of the agenda, we're at the welcome and opening remarks part of the agenda right now. Then we'll be moving to our panel presentations. We'll have time for questions and answer session. We're going to ask you to hold your questions until the Q&A portion of the workshop. The exception to that is if you have a clarifying question about something that you're hearing or seeing on a slide and you just need some clarification on that, go ahead and put that in the chat and just give us a heads up. This is a clarifying question, and let us know what that is, and then we can provide that question to the presenters. Otherwise, hold your questions for the Q&A portion. You can put your questions in the chat as we're going along, if that's helpful to you so that you don't forget. And Megan and I will be tracking and collecting those, and we'll offer as many of those up as we can when we get to the Q&A portion of the workshop. So after Q&A, we'll have a brief 5-minute break. Then we'll move into breakout groups. It'll be county folks in those breakout groups only. Then we'll debrief, get some feedback from you, evaluation, and the workshop will be done. So again, today's topic is APS funding and realignment. We have 3 wonderful presenters with us this morning. First up will be Ardee Apostol. Ardee has a statewide role with CWDA, the California Welfare Directors Association, worked for San Diego County for a long time and is now with San Mateo County. We also have Gergis Kirnalious, Director of Finance, DPSS Riverside County. So Gergis, otherwise known as GK. And then Barry Dewing with Riverside County Assistant Director of Adult Services. So we're going to start off with Ardee, and Ardee's going to be providing an overview of realignment, and then we'll broad to more specific. So Ardee will be doing the broad overview, then Gergis or GK will be talking about program funding at the county level, and then Barry is really going to be focusing on at the program level, like what does this mean for you all? So first, before we launch into the presentations, we have a poll to get a sense of in the room, how familiar are you with realignment? Not at all, somewhat, or very. And this is an anonymous poll, so if you're not at all familiar with realignment, that's totally okay. Somewhat familiar or very familiar. So please take a moment and let us know. We've got responses rolling in. We've got 60. Okay, I don't see, 61. Last chance if you want to weigh in on how familiar you are with realignment. Okay, looks like that is all of our respondents. Can you share the poll results, please, Sierra? So it looks like most people are in the mid-range of somewhat. We've got 21% not at all, 74% somewhat, and 5% very. So for the most part, we're not at all or somewhat familiar with realignment. So this is a good place to start. And with that, Ardee, I will turn it over to you so that we can learn more about realignment and county budgets.
All right, thanks, Don. Morning, everyone. Next slide. Could you go to the next slide, please? There we go. All right, so the big question that always comes up, what is realignment? Realignment is, I think, one clarification we always like to provide is that realignment is not a program, right? Realignment is a funding source. So that's one thing we always kind of start off with our classes, because there's that misconception that realignment is a program, but it's not. It's one of the funding streams for the various programs that the 58 counties in California that we basically run, right? So realignment, again, refers to a series of changes in California's government structure, shifting responsibilities and funding from the state to counties. So when we say shifting funding from the state to counties, what does that really mean? A lot of the programs in the state, if you're familiar with how they set up the funding, is that they go through the appropriation process with the legislature, with the governor's office. So in 1991, state of California was in a deficit. And the solution to get the state out of that deficit was to realign the programs, basically shifting the programs from an appropriation process to now dedicating sales tax and vehicle license fees to fund the program. Again, It's a change in the funding of the program. Instead of using state general fund, now these programs are funded with sales tax and vehicle license fees. And one of the goal of realignment was that it was designed to give counties more control of how services are delivered in health, public safety, and social services. So in 1991, it was really driven to improve the efficiency and reduce the state's fiscal burden by shifting responsibilities to local governments. So in 1991, the main programs that were included were in your mental health, social services, health programs, and also there were some changes in some of your behavioral health program funding structure. This structure here is a basic structure of what 1991 realignment structure at the state level. So you'll see at the top box in statute, 1991 realignment is referenced as local revenue fund. So monthly, half-cent sales tax and a portion of 74.9% of vehicle license fees are collected by the state controller's office and basically sent out to counties on a monthly basis. Again, it's a automatic collection that happens at the state controller's office and sent out on a monthly basis to counties. So that's one important kind of process that counties need to understand, is that you don't have to send reimbursement for realignment. It's sent out every month through the state controller's office. So you'll see here under sales tax, VLF base account, again, like what I mentioned, the main programs here is your mental health, then you have social services. Under social services sub-account, this is where you have your CalWorks, child welfare, and this is where APS falls, right? And then in health sub-account, this is where funding was set aside for our public health programs. CMSP, this is the county medical, was basically for counties that have their own hospitals. And then this next red box is your CalWorks MOE. This funding is set aside to fund our CalWorks assistance payments to clients. And then also with recent changes to the realignment structure, additional funding was set aside to fund, again, our CalWorks programs. These are the two boxes here. Under AB 85, additional funding was carved out to fund our child poverty and family supplemental support and our family support account. So the last three boxes, starting from CalWorks MOE to your family support, all of these funding go directly to our CalWorks assistance programs. And then the last two boxes that's grouped under AB 85, these two funding streams are set aside every year if state legislature or Department of Finance identifies that there's money that will flow into these accounts. The money that goes into this account are used by the state legislature to set what they call a MAP increase. Basically, that's kind of a way to say it, that they provide additional COLA and increased payments to our CalWorks programs. Next slide, please. So here we're just additional breakdown. So you can kind of see, if you take that from the county level, what are the various programs under each bucket? So you see here, we'll start with mental health to the left here. Mental health sub-account, again, a lot of your mental health programs, behavioral health programs, and social services, like I mentioned. This funds your CalWorks, this eligibility employment. So this funds both administration and also assistance or direct payments. Same thing for your various child welfare programs. You have foster care, child welfare adoptions. Again, same thing. This is your funding for both administration and assistance. Um, and as you kind of go through here, you'll kind of see, well, where does APS fall? APS falls in that right below IHSS. You have a section that says County Services Block Grant. So I think it's misleading, but that's where APS was carved out and included in 1991. And then health subaccount, like I mentioned, this is payments for your public health and also your indigent healthcare. And the last three boxes are your CalWorks MOE, family support, and VLF collections. The way that these various accounts are set up at each county, I know in San Mateo and also in San Diego, each county would set these up with various with different revenue accounts. So if you're working with your fiscal team, the way that fiscal would track these is that we would set up our own accounts so that we can individually track how much revenue comes in and how much we recognize every month based on receipts. Next slide. This is a kind of a display on because a lot of questions come up on how much money can counties expect every year as far as realignment. The way the calculation works on the back end is that when we say base, this is your starting point every year. And then with realignment, like I mentioned, it's now based on sales tax and VLF. So one of the advantages of shifting to realignment is that now it's not based on appropriations, but it's based on sales tax and VLF, which is now tied to the economy, right? So when the economy is good, this is where realignment, both on the sales tax on VLF, anticipates what we call growth, meaning that when they set the base, again, in this example, the state control's office, let's say for year one, your starting point is $100. But because the economy is doing good, you receive $10 in growth, meaning that additional receipts came in every month. And now your total receipts every month came in $10 more. So that means that that fiscal year, counties receive a growth amount. So in that example, you now have a total of 110. Well, why does that 110 become an important number? Because in the following year, that basically becomes your base. That is your minimum. That is basically your floor, right? That becomes that how much you receive. But also one of the disadvantages of sales tax and VLF funding as your kind of funding stream is that if you're tied to economy, then counties also shoulder the risk when the economy is bad. I think we saw this, we saw a big dip and a lot of struggle with sales tax and VLF around the Great Recession. With the Great Recession, the economy nationwide did so bad that we saw a big dip in 1991, and that's why a lot of counties had to readjust. Because again, with realignment, that was part of the deal where economy is good, counties benefit. Economy is bad, then that becomes the county's responsibility to make sure programs still run. So there's this mindset for counties to make sure that you build your rainy day fund to make sure that you're able to continue operations when the economy goes down. So in this example, again, we'll use $100 as your base. But what if the economy is bad and you actually now only receive 90 after your 12 months of receipts? So you'll see here in this example that because the economy is bad, starting next year, your base is now the lower amount, which is $90. So during the Great Recession, a lot of counties lost revenue because, again, as the economy slows down, the amount of funding that flowed to the counties monthly, and for from 2007 to process, I think 2011, it kept going down. That's why a lot of the realignment for the counties went down. But after that, 1991 realignment was able to crawl back out and get to a base where counties are now able to adjust and expand programs. Next slide, please. So let's now shift over to 2011. So like what I mentioned, in 1991, the state was in a deficit. Same thing happened in 2011. Like I mentioned, what happened before 2011, right? The Great Recession. Because of the Great Recession, again, the state was back in a deficit. So with that, administration, the legislatures drew up another realignment. So in 2011, realignment went back as again to prompted by the budget crisis and the need to address the overcrowding in state prisons, but also giving local governments more control over public safety and health services. 2011 realignment came about. So with that same concept, they now shifted more responsibility from the finance side, fiscal responsibility to counties. Because even after 1991, counties still received a portion of state general fund for certain programs, mostly child welfare and APS programs in our social services side. So with 2011, that basically wiped out the remaining amount of state general fund that was flowing to counties and now replaced with sales tax or 2011 realignment. So in 2011 realignment, the three areas that was part of that realignment was your support services and law enforcement. So support services, this is programs that are under our health and human services side, and law enforcement, this is your public safety. So if we go to the next slide, one more slide. Oh, here. So with support services, one thing to point here is that support services included two main pots. It's the County Protective Services sub-account, which is again your child welfare and APS, but it also included county behavioral health. So in 2011, behavioral health was also realigned. And a couple things that happened in 2011 is that as counties work with administration, CSAC, CVDA, GIAC, and even CBHDA, there were a lot of lessons learned from 1991 that they took. And one of that was the ability to transfer between accounts. So one is that you'll see here that there's a clause where you can transfer up to 10% of the lesser sub-account between protective services and county behavioral health. And one of the lessons learned as well is that with 1991, it did not allow for a reserve. But with 2011, they had put in a clause that allows county to build up a reserve. But this requires board approval. And with that board approval, counties are able to put up to 5% of the allocated sub-account for the preceding year. So again, even with a 5%, there was a lot of back and forth on the amount because we knew that 5% was still a small amount. But after the negotiations and after everything shook out and what was in the final legend statute is that 5% was the amount. But as counties went through the Great Recession, we knew that 5% was still low. But again, after negotiations and conversations with the administration, they landed with 5%. Next slide. Okay, so here, again, just another way to show the various structure, the various programs and structure under Realignment 2011. So support services, you'll see that, again, there's protective behavioral health, and then there's law enforcement. And if you look at the structure, it's almost similar to your 1991, where you have your main buckets, but also you have a third bucket where it's called the sales and use tax growth. Again, the main purpose of that sales and use tax growth account is to capture additional funding that flows to counties or at the state level that's above and beyond your base amount. And I think one important lesson, one important here is that we talked about the transfer within support services, but it was very clear when the structure was being put together, and as you can see, law enforcement was part of the process. Both law enforcement and social services was very, there was a big ask to make sure that there was a wall between support services and law enforcement, meaning that funds cannot transfer between support services and law enforcement. So even at the county level, even if your board or anyone wanted to do that, that was not allowable. That's not allowable. So that's one thing where we always talk about there's a wall between our support services and law enforcement funding. If you go to the next slide. So here, if we dive in down to the county level, like what I mentioned in 1991, within the bigger buckets, you have specific programs that fall into each of those buckets. So I'd like to focus on the County Protective Service subaccount because I think that's the area that's relevant for this group, where you look at that list and you'll see down the line there's adult protective services under County Protective Services subaccount. And you'll see here, again, a lot of the kind of the goal when they were looking at 2011 is that looking at focus on public safety and health systems. So when they were looking at this, well, what kind of fell in that category under our protective services was really around our child welfare programs and also under our aging programs, mainly in APS. So it was not applied to all the social services programs. It was kind of a select programs that fell under public safety and health systems. So again, that's why your list here is shorter compared to your 1991 realignment. Real brief here. I know there's that big box. It says Women and Children's Residential Treatment Special Account. So this is a fixed amount every year, very small amount at the state level. I think 5 million, if I recall. But there's about, I think, 5 to 6 counties that receive this fixed amount, so very small. But again, when they were looking at realignment, what they looked at are counties that still receive general fund for certain programs that fall within the parameters that was set by statute. And with this, there were only 5, 6 counties that was operating the this residential treatment program that are specifically for women and children. So. Next slide. For 1991 realignment structure growth, this is just a kind of a graphics that shows if there is growth, how do we divvy up the growth? I think the takeaway here is that there's very specific calculations and kind of hierarchy of who gets the money first. So if there are additional money that's available to counties because the economy is performing well, the money will flow first to sales tax caseload subaccount. That is somewhat misleading. It's not paying for caseload, but what that is doing is that is paying for any increased cost in the programs that are under 1991 realignment. So there's a process that happens at the state level, and a select group of counties participate in that process with CDSS to basically compare 2 fiscal years. Let's just say comparing this fiscal year to last fiscal year, did your expenditure for your program grow? If yes, they'll look at that and add all of the increases for your various programs to see if you as a county are eligible for caseload growth. CMSP growth, again, this is specific to CMSP counties. So after that's been satisfied, any additional growth remaining will then be paid out by these percentages to mental health, and then any remaining growth will go to our CalWorks programs. Next slide. Again, this is just kind of a reiteration of that. You'll see if there's sales tax, caseload growth, CMSP, then general growth. So for VLF growth, all of that only goes to CMSP and general growth. VLF does not fund caseload. So important key there between sales tax and VLF. Only sales tax pays for your expenditure growth. Next slide. Excuse me. So for 2011 realignment, same concept. They made it more simple for 2011. Very formulaic. If there's growth, 65% goes to your health and human service programs, then 35% goes to our law enforcement programs. Next slide. And under support services, same thing. That's 65% gets divvied up between our protective services, which that 45% will include funding for your APS and child welfare programs, 50% to your behavioral health, and then 5% to your mental health subaccount. And then next slide. So here, one of the things that we look at is that what are the programs realigned between 1991 and 2011, right? The reason we like to put this this kind of the 3 spears here is that I want you guys to focus on that green box, right? Because as you can see, that green box becomes your shared programs between 1991 and 2011, right? As we talked about how realignment was very pivotal in reshaping how California kind of funds and how we deliver key services. Because again, the key emphasis of realignment, one of the advantages of it is that it provides local control and resource management. So that flexibility is there. So how you maximize and leverage is really in that shared funding section. So with that, there's a lot of kind of partnership collaboration that needs to happen within fiscal and program to make sure that you find ways how to maximize your funding and use towards your various programs. especially when both programs are realigned, then you can do a lot of braided and funding and maximizing what you get on an annual basis. So as you can see, one of the shared programs is APS. So the reason I say that is that you do have flexibility on how you use your 1991 and 2011 realignment if they're shared programs, because they're technically same funding streams that you can use in between. So those, I think, are some of the takeaways that we encourage counties to do, is make sure that you coordinate and you talk to your program folks if you're from the fiscal side. And same thing, if you're fiscal, talk to your program team and make sure you're coordinating, leveraging, and understanding what each of the departments do so that you can leverage and really maximize the funding and take advantage of that flexibility and control, and be creative in how you set your program so that we are leveraging your funding. And again, I think one key thing to think about for realignment is that it's based on economy. So always plan ahead, make sure that you're able to adjust when the economy is up, most especially if this economy is down. So that's where that collaboration and that overlap is a key. Next slide, please. Here, I'll drop this on the chat. It's just a link to the state controller's website where you can kind of browse through the various realignment that counties receive. But I'll specifically drop the link where you can see how much 1991 and 2011 each county gets. So again, that's the overview of 1991 realignment. I know it's, again, scratch the surface, or even barely scratch the surface. Like what Don mentioned, I'll drop the link to the upcoming realignment class. Working with CSAC, we provide a 2-day class, and we usually host it around April and October. So we offer those classes twice a year. And I'll drop the chat, and hopefully it's still open and you are still able to register, because it does get filled fairly quickly. If not, then there's the October class that you can join. So with that, I think I turn it over to Gergis.
Thank you, Ardee. Good morning, everyone. My name is Gergis Kirnalious, or GK, as Don mentioned. I am the Chief Finance Officer for Riverside County Department of Public Social Services. I'm pleased and honored to be here with you today to discuss the important aspects of the APS funding, budget, and claiming process. Before I go over with the slides, I just want to just mention a little bit of my background. I came from a third world country. I grew up there. I came to the US when I was 23 after I finished my college. And I started working for Riverside County as an accountant technician. At that time, I started learning about the IHSS program, which is, a program that provide, caregivers would go to the elder individual and help them, clean, prepare food and stuff. And I was amazed. And I said, this is all for free. This is not where this is way different from where I came from. So I fell in love with this country. I fell in love with what we do. It's way different from a lot of other countries. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm kind of locked in. I will never go anywhere. This is my career. I love helping people. This is amazing. So I just want to mention that the service that social services provide to the individuals, it's an honor thing to do. So I just want to kind of mention that before we start the slide. So next slide, please. So I wanted to start by defining the APS program. And as you know, APS is designed to address the abuse, neglect, or exploitation of elder or dependent adult clients who meet specific criteria. These clients are often unable to protect their own interests, may be harmed or threatened with harm, and may suffer from physical or mental injury due to various factors such as ignorance, lack of education, incompetence, mental limitations, substance abuse, or poor health in general. Additionally, these individuals may lack adequate food, shelter, or clothing, or be deprived of entitlement due to them. Our mission as social workers is to provide the necessary support and protection to ensure their safety and well-being. So this is just a general definition of what is APS mean. Next slide, please. There are various funding sources that we have or available to us to fund the APS program. First, we have the Title 19, that's federal entitlement money. There is no cap. It's what we call it open-ended. Means it requires a match. As long as we put the match, the federal would put the match. The match required normally is non-federally funded. And we also have funds, Medicaid eligible service and case management, which I will cover in the next few slides. And we also have a state general funds, specially allocated to APS expansion and the APS American Rescue Plan Act, which is ARPA. These two programs were established after, of course, 2011. That's why it's not realigned. And as Ardee mentioned, local revenue funds, the 2011 realignment, and a little bit of also 1991. So in general, realignment also can help pay for the cost for APS, services. And of course, if there is no other funding source available to fund your APS program, it has to come from county general fund. Your county, what we call it NCC, net county cost. That's the money that you need to get if there is no other funding sources available to fund your APS program. Next slide, please. So here in Riverside County, as we look at the budget, we want to make sure we budget for everything. Of course, a big component of that is the staffing. This includes, the caseworkers who are responsible for investigating the APS cases, as well as support staff, like administrative staff, clerical staff, any generic or general staff that helps, like the accountants, like HR, like things like that, that really tab or be part of the APS program. And then, of course, operating cost, the facility cost, the IT cost, any training that is required, any other operating cost like tab or temporary assistant staff, supplies, anything related that might be needed to run the program. And of course, also contracted services, whether these contracted services are client-related services or any other contracted services that is needed for the program. Once we put all this together, we know how much that will cost. Let's say if it's a 50 million, let's say, then that 50 million, we look at how much of that 50 million we'll get from federal, and then see how much of realignment remaining that, can support the match of that. So kind of when we go through the budget process, we kind of identify all of these pieces to ensure that we fully funded. And of course, we monitor this funding or the budget on a quarterly basis. We meet with our APS executives on a quarterly basis to kind of look at the budget. We track the expenditures. We kind of appraise them of where we at to ensure that we maintain this budget. If there is a changes throughout the fiscal year, we ensure that we incorporate these changes to ensure that we have enough appropriations and funding to run the program. Next slide, please. So how do we get the federal share? How the claiming process happen? The claiming process is basically we use the county expense claim, which is the mechanism that was established by California Department of Social Services, CDSS, to claim various costs that we spend and also to access other funding sources, like I mentioned, the federal share. There are two types of codes. We have the time study codes. These are, you guys are familiar with that if you work for the county. Everything is driven by how people time study. And each time study code have a different funding source, which I will cover. So there are codes that only funded locally, which when I say locally, when we say local funds, meaning realignment plus any NCC or county cost. These are the regular APS codes, covering non-health related codes. Non-health related means no federal share. And there is other codes that has federal financial participation. These are the health related codes, which is covered by the federal. There are codes has a 50% federal share, and other codes has 75 federal share, which again, I'm going to be covering in the next few slides. I just wanted to mention that APS expansion allocation, there is no specific code was established for that program. APS expansion allocation is accessed through the same APS codes in the county expense claim. Once this allocation is fully expended, any overmatch of the state fund expenditure will shift to county only funding. I think that's a great way to spend the money because, or fully maximize the money. CDSS ensures that all counties will get all of their funding, the allocation for the APS expansion through that process. Next slide, please. So before I start talking about the different codes, I want to kind of highlight the requirement for the enhanced 75% for the skilled professional medical personnel, SPMP. Generally, this is a 75% federal funding. There are requirements. Individuals must have completed a medical program that lasts at least 2 years, possess a medical license, certification, or degree recognized by licensor bodies. The job position and duties must require medical knowledge and skills. Additionally, these individuals must be staff of the county welfare departments or another county agency contracted to perform allowable activities. These services rendered by an SPMP must be eligible for medical, and staff directly supporting an SPMP also qualify for the enhanced funding. This funding is meant to keep skilled medical personnel and their team who provide important medical services. So these are the different requirements that require to get the enhanced funding 75%. A while back, I believe, since 2017, which is the next slide, please. Currently, counties are not funded with the enhanced 75% of qualified SPMP activities. Since December 2017, we are only getting 50% of these activities. There is an ongoing communication with the Department of Health Care Services, the HCS, to actually process the outstanding 25%. So we're entitled to 75%, but we're getting only 50% for these activities. So I encourage all counties to track the outstanding 25% that is entitled to us, just in case if they ask how much is remaining, how much is the cost, then each county will know the exact amount that's outstanding. But in general, SPMP activities are entitled to 75% enhanced funding. Just let's keep it that way for now, okay? Next slide, please. So let's talk about the different time study codes. As I mentioned, we have regular APS codes, which is non-health related. This is non-federal share codes. These codes are funded at 100% local funding, which is a mix again between realignment and county costs. So the two codes here I put is 05691, that's APS emergency response, and then 05701 APS case management, which I'll go over the activities in the next slide, please. So 05691 APS emergency response, the activities for this. So if you have a social worker doing these type of activities, they must time study to this code. Response to reports and referrals, immediate face-to-face response for intake or intervention, 24-hour APS program, including evaluation and investigation, social work activity that remedy or prevent abuse and neglect, and arranging of services. Next slide, please. The other code is the 05701 APS case management. The activities for this code is case management activities after the initial investigation and response to reports and referrals, further investigation, assessment, and identification of client needs, establishing or updating a service plan, providing counseling, provide training to stakeholders, arranging of services. Next slide, please. And then the SPMP codes. These are the 75% federal share enhanced funding. These codes are designed for APS health-related activities performed by an SPMP personnel that helps to ensure access by APS clients to service covered by DHCS state Medicaid plan in order to reduce risk of poor health outcomes. Again, the funding source is 75% federal and 25% local funding. And local funding means, again, it's Realignment and NCC. Next slide, please. So the first code is 05711. That's APS SPMP response. And these are the different activities that is being performed by an SPMP personnel, liaising with the medical service providers and other agencies, providing expert medical opinions to facilitate access to medical, and assessing the necessity and advocacy of the medical care through case management. They also develop referrals and tracking system to expedite access to medical, create and review policies for coordinating medical services, and counsel with the medical providers to ensure clients receive the medical services they are eligible for. Next slide, please. And the other code is 05721 APS SPMP case management. The activities for this code is developing and monitoring progress on time-limited objectives based on the assessments, identified problems and strength, overseeing the medical plan, cover, service and activities to meet the service plan objectives and goals, describing how the client will be assessed and linked with medical covered services, continuously monitoring, following up, and reassessing to determine the effectiveness of the medical service plan, helping clients and their significant other implement the medical service plan, arranging necessary services. Next slide, please. So the other codes are the health-related codes. This is similar services, but as the SPMP activities, except that they are not done by an SPMP professional medical personnel. So these services or these codes are reimbursed based on 50% federal and 50% local funding. We have the 05731 APS HR response, and the other time study code is 05741 APS HR case management. Again, it's the same type of activities, except it's not done by an SPMP personnel. Next slide. So this is, again, the activities for an APS HR response. Again, similar activities. Next slide. And the other code is HR case management. Next slide. Then I wanted to provide the time study code for the ARPA funding. Each county got an allocation. In order to access this allocation, you must time study to this code for the social workers. This code, the activities for this code is the development and implementation of service plan involving securing emergency or alternative housing for APS clients, coordinating with the care facilities, also includes providing food resources, transportation to medical appointments or community resources, addressing physical and mental health needs, conducting video visit with client, extending hours or hiring temporary staff to fulfill more duties, and helping clients understand and avoid scams, like such as the different scams in the internet and phone calls and stuff like that. Next slide. And I believe that's it for me, and I will hand it to Barry to talk about the program aspect of the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Gergis. Sierra, how much time do I have?
You have 20 minutes, Barry.
Oh, great. Thanks, Don. Much appreciated. Hello, everybody. My name is Barry Dewing, and I'm the Assistant Director with Adult Services Division for Riverside County. And inside Adult Services Division, we do adult protective services and in-home supportive services, and also the public authority is housed under us. So it's nice to be here with you today. And I want to tell you that I have about 12 years of work in child welfare and 14 years in adult services. And the vast majority of it has been in operations. So I'm an operations guy, and I have an operations perspective on the field of adult services and particularly adult protective services. What that means is that every day I'm learning a little bit more about fiscal, and every day I'm realizing more and more that the reality is at the leaders level that you run a business, and the business has some limited funding and has these funding structures and so on and so forth. But it's no longer about making the perfect case related decision. It's really about making sure that the business is able to meet the needs of the community, right? So it's a kind of a different perspective, and it was an odd adjustment for me, moving out of operations into administration, upper administration. If there's three things I want you to take away from my part of this presentation, is again that it's a business. When you get high enough, it's really about a business model that needs to support the social workers doing the work. To meet with your CFO often, talk with them, explore ideas with them, learn from them, ask them repeated questions, all that kind of stuff. Your CFO is an expert in that area. Probably you are not, and you need their help and support. It's even better when you like the person, like how much I like Gergis. But even if you don't like the person, take them out for coffee and talk with his team or her team or however that works, because you do need them and they need you. And lastly, it's okay if you're coming from an operations perspective to make it simple and make it accessible so that you can make the right decisions. You probably don't have all the training that Ardee and Gergis have, but you still have to make some decisions. So if you need it simple, design it that way. Okay, so those are the three things I want you to take away from this. Next slide, please. Next slide again. All right. So again, behind great services is a great business model. Always in operations, we were sort of handed the people we needed, and we needed to make sure that they did the right kind of investigation to the right level to do the right services in the right places, and so on and so forth. Sort of the deployment of your forces, what operations is. When you get to the next side of the agency, it's really about making sure that those resources are available in the first place. And it's a different kind of approach. And I'm going to tell you, I'm being honest with you, when I moved into my position, and that was my full-time job, I felt a little behind and underqualified. I think I used the word dumb, and that's kind of how I felt sometimes talking to Gergis or talking to his predecessor, Monica, because I was underskilled. And so use these kind of trainings, use the training that Ardee mentioned that's coming up here twice a year to get as skilled as you can be. So, but know that the transition can be a little bit awkward, and that's normal. And I felt much comfort when I realized that my agency builds staff. That's what I do. I'm a manufacturer of social workers who go out and create assessments and interventions. When I came to that realization, the job got simpler for me. And so if you struggle with that perspective, just keep it in mind, because it might be helpful to you. Okay, next slide, please. During the COVID years in adult protective services, it just seemed like we were very flush with money. It seemed like we were constantly hiring. We had ARPA, we had AB 135, there was room key money for homelessness. There was just so much, it felt like support coming in. However, the narrative's changed, and we know it's changed. And so you might be downsizing. And if you're downsizing, you have to work very closely with your fiscal team. Don't be afraid to ask questions over and over and over again. You're probably very skilled in operations, but you need to understand how the budget works and where you're at it at all times, because that's your responsibility. They're very nice people. They do like talking to you. They really appreciate it when you're interested in how they understand things. So I think that there's an easy bridge to be built there. So talk with them a lot. Take the time to learn the reports, learn the funding pots, look for the opportunities. The math is pretty simple. You don't have to be an accountant to understand the math. As Ardee and Gergis went through, there's a lot of different funding pots and so on and so forth. It goes on behind the scenes that's much more complex. But for you in the operations side, the math might be pretty straightforward. And it's easiest if you work directly with your fiscal team regularly, so you know where you are and how much money you have or don't have to work with. So don't be afraid of it. And then lastly, I think it's good to share with your fiscal team what it is you want to achieve. If they have an idea of what direction you're going, not just telling you what's available, but what direction you really want to go with your department, and the needs that you have, that conversation is worth gold because they can help you get there. But they won't know that unless you're proactively meeting with them and have an idea about what you want to do with your program. All right, next slide. So one of the things that we realized coming out of COVID was that our pots of money were fixed. We had a budget and we were maximizing the use of that budget, but we were not producing a tremendous amount of work, and it felt like caseload was quite high. And one of the things that we found was that attrition is really money wasted, right? And if you step back and say, if my business model is to make social workers who go out and do assessments and interventions, I have a defect in my product, right? So one of the aha moments we had here was we just took a look at the number of social workers we had leave by say the 14-month mark. And most attrition occurs between 0 and 12 months, but we put it to 14 months. And we had something like a 40% attrition rate, right? So we know that during COVID, it was very hard to bring on and support workers transitioning into long-term workers. There was telework and office depopulation, and we had to figure out the training models, and we had to figure out the support models, and we hadn't figured them out, but the money was there, so we kept hiring and hiring and hiring. So we could always keep our staff numbers filled, but our productivity wasn't there because everybody was somewhere in the training cycle. So if you just do a very simple math calculation, just take the number of people you lost in a year, times it by the cost of your social worker, and then let your jaw drop, and you would say, oh my gosh, that's a lot of money we invested in somebody who's not here producing work. And when you come to that realization, and if you back up to the business model, you realize you got to do something about your attrition. Prior to COVID, attrition for us in Riverside County in IHSS was about 18%, and in adult protective services, it was 6%. Now, I had told you it had gotten up to 35, 40% during COVID times, right? So we were cycling people in like crazy. We had to hire, and we had to select, hire, train, assign caseload, and then they would leave, select, hire over and over and over again. And I'll give you just an IHSS number, but the same model works. We had 115 continuing workers that were adding up to 70 full-time case carrying workers. So you can see that we're paying for 115, but it was adding up to the power of 70. So there's in your business model on how to maximize your budget, look at your attrition, and then look at your entire hiring system. What we didn't realize was we were really disjointed. Social worker ones weren't really being groomed to promote to twos, and twos to promote to threes. Threes are who carry cases for us in adult protective services, right? But there are other roles inside of adult services division where a person can be a social worker 1, a social worker 2, but we weren't really looking at the progression of the way they could matriculate into our permanent ranks. And as you know, if you take somebody who was successful in job A and successful in a harder version of job A, which was job B, and then they're likely to be more successful in job C, as opposed to hiring somebody directly from it. So we had to back up and really look at how our hiring and matriculation system was built and was it connected. And after that, combined with the way we're changing the way we support people and so on and so forth, we've really brought our attrition down, which is maximizing the use of our monies. Gergis is going to tell me there's a fixed budget for you here, Barry. You got to stay within this budget. The next most important thing to me is then let's get every penny from that budget and translate it into good workers doing good work. And the social workers really appreciate it because then workload is spread across more of them. Okay, next slide, please. Again, how to maximize your budget. Look at how you select, train, and support your staff. If you change to a part-time telework model, you probably have to make adjustments to how often they're seeing their supervisors, how often they're hanging around with experienced workers who can guide them through things. If it needs correction, correct it. Gergis talked a lot about time studying, and we time study a lot to health related. and it's just a more lucrative code. Keep this in mind, at least for us in Riverside County. The vast majority of our APS clients are either on Medi-Cal, would qualify for Medi-Cal, or are on their way to Medi-Cal. And so there's an issue of poverty that goes with adult protective services. Underlying most adult protective services issues is a lack of resources, right? And then there's kind of a cascading effect that follows. So add to that we have a substantial amount of confirmations of abuse on the folks that are in IHSS. And as we know, IHSS is a Medi-Cal-based program. So from our perspective, we know that Medi-Cal is something that the vast majority of our clients either are on or are about to be on. And so when we do our APS work, we do it through the lens of assessing, is this person eligible for Medi-Cal? What would need to happen for them to be eligible for Medi-Cal if they're, say, the working poor? They just need to have a share of cost and address the share of cost to be able to get Medi-Cal. Are they on IHSS already? So we're looking at all of that. We start from the lens there and we work forward. Okay, if they are on Medi-Cal, now what are the Medi-Cal services that they should be linked to? And we make that assessment via our biopsychosocial assessment, which you guys know from your work in the Medi-Cal field. It covers almost all aspects of a person's living, right? If there's a need. So it's a great health plan. And you just have to be honest in terms of, are we looking through this lens of eligibility in order to be able to time study properly? Next is funding opportunities. There's ARPA, there's VOCA, there's through HUD and the COC, there's HAP and HDAP. There was ESFG, or it might be EFSG. There's lots of different kinds of funding, including your home safe funding, that you can use to supplement your program so that you can have your base monies from APS as described by Ardee and Gergis, and then augment that through, say, HAP, right? Now, in Riverside County, we are very active in adult protective services when it comes to homeless clients. So anybody 60 plus, we want the county to refer to us. We carry that case. We go well beyond our 30-day time limits because that's the way the homeless world works. And we use other funding to do the interventions, right? Much like we did Home Safe, we received it and administered it directly. We use these other monies to augment what we're doing. But be careful about tying your staff to monies like HAP and HDAP and so on and so forth. As you know, working in the homeless world, you probably got a 3-year grant for the money. It's going to come to you actually late in the cycle, and it's going to end earlier in the cycle. And you, as a county employer, you can't really build and support social workers on a very short model like that. So please keep in mind, it's probably better for you to use that money for direct services and interventions as opposed to paying for your staff. And then lastly, track your spending. Know where you are at all times. It is uncomfortable to come into a meeting and find out that you're off course. And so you want to be regularly looking at things, not just relying on your fiscal team, but if you are like us and you have a small administration program inside of your adult services program, be working with them closely. And then when I say eat the big frogs first, that's usually the toughest decision, right? If you had to eat a plate of frogs, you'd want to eat the big one first, and then all the other ones are easier to eat. Sometimes you have to make some tough decisions about programs, number of people in the program, how much support you're going to do in the program, so on and so forth. So my recommendation was just figure out which one is the linchpin and go after that. Okay, next slide, please. Again, if you need it simple, then keep it simple. I've asked Gergis and his team the same question 25 times in a row. And it's because I have an operations mindset. So there's not quite the place for it to sit in my mind on a regular basis, right? So if you need it simple, keep it simple. And they have so much experience, they're gonna talk with you about this, and they know all the base concepts and so on and so forth. But in the operations side, you and your team probably don't know it as well as you think. And so you'll wanna make sure it's accessible. And then because this is the Leaders Institute and you're all moving yourself into some level of high decision making, do know you're gonna have to make some tough decisions. And you're gonna have to go out and talk with all your staff about that tough decision. And they're gonna look at you and say, that gives me more cases. Or I don't know that I value the way you made that decision. And I think it comes with the territory. So be well reasoned, be well disciplined, and understand why you're making the decisions you're making. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so this here is some actual budget numbers, and this goes back to keeping it simple, right? So when I came into my position, we were faced with really needing to downsize a bit in adult services division. And so those were, a tough way to start. And when I was talking with my team, what we realized is we all thought we understood what was going on, but none of us could really explain it to each other. And if you can't explain it, then maybe you don't quite understand it as well as you think. And I know we've all been in those things where I'm not sure why it works, but I know it does work. But sometimes you need more than that. So we had to break down our budget much differently inside of my division so that we could, as an operating business, understand exactly where we're at. And that is with the support of Gergis and his team, who have been magnificent to us all along. So ASD's total budget's big, $94 million. So we had to say, okay, well, where are we? And it was very hard for my team to say where we were at any one time. And so we would have to reconcile with Gergis's teams. Where are we? How much have we spent? Okay, that's 55%, 51 million, that's 55%. Where should we be? That was another way of looking at things that we weren't looking at very closely inside of my own division. So we should be at 54%. Okay, what's the difference? Well, we're a little above schedule by the tune of about 582,000. And so this kind of understanding of keeping it simple let us know exactly where we're at. So my deputies know where we're at. My managers know where we're at. I know where we're at. And we're always talking with Gergis as well. So next slide, please. Now, this is, again, looking at, let me look at that. This is the staffing portion of that budget. So the bulk of adult services division is involved in staffing because we don't really do that much in contracts and other things, say like CWS does. So where were we again? Okay, we know that we're 55% expended, but where we should be is 54% expended, and we're over in staffing. Okay, we know we have some staffing targets we're still trying to get down to. Well, how many people do we need to still adjust down to? Well, it's about 16.2 people. Okay, so we know that that's inside of our attrition margin because it's all of our staffing. So we can get to that 16.2 just naturally by adjusting the way we hire and how much we hire and who we hire. We're going to be able to get down to that. But again, this is where you, kind of looking at what you're doing as a business and saying, okay, if I had to balance ledger sheets in my own company, this is the stuff I would need to know. And this is the kind of responsibility I think that we all have as leaders. Okay, so that's the staffing portion. Let's go to the next slide, please. Here's the same thing for IHSS. We don't have the same size of reduction necessary in IHSS right now. 55%, 54%. The difference is we're negative 280. We probably need to lose about almost 3 people out of IHSS. We got a lot of IHSS folks, and because we're a big IHSS program, That's well inside of our expected attrition rate. We're going to be okay. All right, next slide, please. Admin staff. So I'm just taking you guys through this, just the model of keeping it very simple so we know where we're at. And we meet on this every month to talk about the changes and where we're at. And again, so we're looking at all parts of the program to see where is it over, where are we under, how is that going to add up to our overall budget expectations, and so on and so forth. So for here in admin, we're a little bit high, 56%, but our expected usage would be 54%. We're over about 2 people, but my admin program is small in comparison to the IHSS program and the APS program. So proportionally, they're a little high. Next slide, please. Clerical staff, same concepts. I think you're getting the same concepts. And the reason why these are here is if you go to the next slide, please. We broke out our budget to all of the different areas where we spend money. From what you just saw, admin, clerical, IHSS, overall APS, to what we spend on TAP, overtime, staff development, which is our training program, incentives, our contracts, so on and so forth. And we look at this again every month in order to say, where are we on track? Because we have some targets that we have to get down to because a little bit of a downturn in our budget. And so if we track it regularly, while also keeping an eye on how do we retreat a little bit, and maintain the great services that we're expected to do at the same time, we've got to maximize our workforce. There's no point in having 100 people if only 70 of them are working. Let's have 100 people. Let's have 95 of them, but let's have 85 of them working. Actually, that's a net gain. So we just had to make some adjustments and work our way down and understand that what Gergis and Ardee provide to us, we have to then manage really, really effectively. And as much as we always want it, the pot of money is never going to just continue to grow and grow and grow. Sometimes we're going to have to manage the downturns in our funding cycles. And this happens, it's happened a number of times over my 26 years. And we can find a way forward other than just asking for more money. So with that, I think that go to the next slide. I think that's my last slide. So thank you again. I want to repeat the 3 most important things. Talk with your fiscal team all the time. Buy them lunch, bring them coffee, bagels. They love to eat. Everybody loves to eat in social services, and it's great. They're good people. They're smart people. Let them advise you. Another thing is, if you're a leader, you have to step away from the case approach and really start learning that there's a business model, and you're responsible to all those social workers and all those clients to have a great business model that gives them the best available possibility to be successful. And then if you need it simple, like me, I'm just a simple farmer. If you need it simple, then work to get it to be simple, because when it's simple, then it's accessible to everybody in the room, and then they'll understand the mission and where you're going. So thank you for your time, and thank you for developing yourself, and thank you to Dawn and APSWI and everybody else for being here today.
Great. Thank you so much, Barry. This is so much good information from all 3 of you. I'm learning so much. And also, even though I'm not in APS anymore, it's helping me realize, oh, that's why that happened when I was working for a county. It's really helping me develop a much better understanding. And I have some key takeaways. I'm writing down things that I'm going to be sharing with my director. This is such great information. Thank you. So with that, we're going, Sierra, will you stop the recording now?